Welcome to the Kenny Aronoff Sessions podcast. I just finished performing with Joe Satriani on the G3 tour featuring Joe, Steve Vai, and brilliant Eric Johnson. And I also did the Monsters of Rock cruise with Joe, and now I'm on an 8-week tour across the USA with Joe Satriani and Steve Vai. Now, if you're into seeing Joe and Steve shred, go to Joe's website and see if we're performing in your city. The recording session scene in LA in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s was like a rush hour in New York City for me. I mean, busy, busy, busy. I worked 7 days and nights a week and loved every minute of it. I sometimes had 2 or 3 drum sets set up in 3 different studios around LA, and I would run from one studio to another, recording with new and upcoming and established artists. Now, here's an example of a crazy 2-week period for me. In 1997, I was rehearsing with the brilliant John Fogerty for an up-and-coming tour from 12 to 6 every day at Center Staging, not on the weekend though. And then I would race to Rumble Studios and record drums from 7 to 11 p.m. for a new artist that Bruce Springsteen's keyboard player, Roy Bittan, was producing. Well, one night after Roy's session, Don Was invited me to stop by Ocean Way Studios, which is now called East West Studios, where he was producing the Rolling Stones record, Bridges to Babylon. The crazy thing was, on the weekends, I was recording Jon Bon Jovi's second solo record, Destination Anywhere. So, I was working 7 days, 7 nights a week. Well, the first night I showed up at Ocean Way Studios to check out the Stones, it's like a beehive, people running around all over the place. And I go into the room, the lounge, and there's this brilliant session drummer, Jim Keltner, my friend. He says, "Kenny, man, what are you doing here?" I says, "Well, Don invited me to come by." He says, "You know Charlie Watts?" And Charlie turned around, big smile, shook his hand. He said, "You know, Charlie, Kenny's a brilliant drummer. You should have him play percussion on your solo record," which they were recording in Studio 2 in the back. Jim Keltner was producing Charlie's record. It was kind of a tribute to a lot of jazz drummers. Anyway, Charlie was open to it. And see, Jim and I had done drums and percussion side by side on a Joe Cocker record called Organic. Literally, I'd play kick drum, hi-hat, he plays snare drum and toms, and we might have percussion, a shaker or a tambourine in our hand. Anyway, Jim was thinking, man, Kenny does some cool stuff. Why don't you do this on Charlie's record? So we started doing it, and at the end of recording, which could have been 3, 4 in the morning, Charlie says, "Hey, man, would you be into coming back tomorrow?" I went, "Are you kidding me? Of course." I kept coming back. And the second week, I come back, and let me first say this. The way the Stones were recording this record was that Mick would have the studio Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the big room, Studio 1. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Keith Richards would have the room. They weren't doing it together. They were doing their own thing. Well, Don Was finally said, "Dude, if you guys want to be the Rolling Stones, you got to record together as the Stones." So the second week I walk in, all of a sudden, everyone's there. Ronnie Wood, Charlie, Mick, Keith, everybody. And on this particular song, it was like 4 in the morning. I can't even remember the name. I'm playing a gourd with beads on it with a brush, kind of like a hi-hat part. And it went perfectly with Keith Richards' acoustic guitar part and Charlie's hi-hat. And the cool thing was, Mick comes up to me and says, "Hey, Kenny, I really dig what you're doing, but don't get in the way of Charlie's hi-hat." The takeaway for me was like, this guy, one of the greatest lead singers in one of the biggest rock and roll bands ever, was fully aware that part of the sound of the Rolling Stones is Charlie's drumming, his hi-hat, along with Keith Richards and all the key players in the band. In other words, it wasn't about him, the lead singer. It was about everybody. It was about the team. He understood that all these guys working together creates the Rolling Stones sound. I thought that was amazing. That's the ultimate team player. Anyway, check out my podcast, The Kenny Aronoff Sessions, on my YouTube channel, Kenny Aronoff Official, and subscribe. There are some very cool discussions and stories with artists like Bill Burr, Sammy Hagar, and Steve Lukather, just to name a few. In each episode, we discuss how they became successful and have stayed successful in their lives and career. It's a cool hang. Check it out.